May 7th, 2017, Carlisle, Ohio. 18-year-old varsity cheerleader Brooke Skylar Richardson gave birth at home and buried her newborn daughter in the backyard of her parents' house. 2 months later, she described what had happened to her doctor, who informed police. Richardson was ultimately charged with aggravated murder, child endangerment, involuntary manslaughter, and abuse of a corpse. Today, we look back into this case and deep dive into the investigation, the testimony, and the verdict. Ultimately, we ask the question, was justice served in this case? Today, we find out together. This is BETHEA'S BYTE Reloaded Throwback, Ohio versus Richardson. And it begins right now. Good Friday evening, good late Friday afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to installment number 5 of BETHEA'S BYTE Reloaded Throwback, Ohio versus Richardson. I'm Ernest Bethea, the last outlaw. Thank you all so much for joining me, as always. And when we last left off on yesterday, we literally and figuratively saw a prosecution witness get roasted during cross-examination. Can the same thing happen? Could lightning strike at the same place at the same time? We're going to find out because we have 2 more witnesses to come up. The first is anthropologist Krista Lathan, and second will be maternal fetal medicine specialist Dr. Kim Brady. So get ready. We may have a 2-for-1 smoking coming on. But as always, before we get started, I want to do the house cleaning real quick. So I want to say thank you all for joining me. Please make sure you like, share, subscribe, and comment. And throwing a like on this video helps it helps the channel out. If you're on YouTube right now, it's already pinned. If you want to join the live panel, please come on board. We're more than happy to have you. Click the link, copy it, put it in a new browser window or tab. If you're in the chat already, everything that is said, all comments, all statements, views, that's all speculation, deduction, theory, or opinion. They're not considered evidence or fact. Your opinions are welcome. Yes, they are. But attacks on other chatters, we're not doing that. If you don't like an opinion, all you got to do is click the 3 dots, click right to the right of the name, click on block, and you're good. And you're good. You don't have to hear from that person. All right. Big time coverage. This is my copyright disclaimer. This is only the short form version. I do have the long form version. This is also a trigger warning because everything you may see and hear during testimony could be triggering to your mental health, and I want to preserve that. So if you can't handle hearing what is being testified to, do not stick around. All testimony you'll see is coming courtesy from my good friends at Court TV, your front row seat to justice. Oh, and I shouldn't have to do this, but please, all I'm asking is to be respectful. We don't need the racism, the homophobia, any attacks on chatters, and no spamming. No, we're not talking politics or religion. Let's just keep it straightforward and focus on what we're talking about. Okay. Thank you so much. Now that we got the air clear, I am going to get this thing set and ready. We are now going to hear testimony from anthropologist Krista Lathan.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you will give in these proceedings is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help you God?
I do.
Proceeding. Sit up close and speak into this microphone, please. May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you. Doctor, would you please state your name, spell your last name for the record?
Yes, it's Dr. Krista Latham, Latham,
Doctor, where are you employed?
at the University of Indianapolis.
What is your position there?
I am an associate professor of biology and anthropology. I'm also the director of the University of Indianapolis Human Identification Center
How long have you been employed there?
since 2007.
What do your duties consist of?
I teach graduate and undergraduate classes in human biology, human anatomy, and human genetics. I also oversee the forensic casework that is analyzed through the Human Identification Center.
Would you go over with the jury your educational background that qualifies you for your position?
Okay. I have a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Chemistry, and I graduated cum laude with honors. My first master's degree is a Master of Science in Human Biology. I also have a master's degree in anthropology and a PhD in anthropology. And throughout my educational experience, I was taught and mentored by board-certified forensic anthropologists.
Doctor, do you have any research, like a research specialty?
Yes, I am a forensic and molecular anthropologist, and that means that I study humans at the DNA and the skeletal levels. So I study human skeletons and human DNA. My research focuses specifically on aspects of human identification, and it's been published in journals and books as well as presented at scientific meetings.
Okay. Do you belong to any professional memberships?
Yes, I am a fellow of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, and I'm also a member of many other organizations like the International Association for Identification, the American Society of Human Genetics. I've been presenting my research for over 15 years at these meetings and have about 100 presentations at formal scientific meetings.
And doctor, do you have a curriculum vitae detailing your experience?
Yes.
I want to show you what's been marked for identification purposes as States Exhibit 111. You can take a look at that and tell me whether you recognize what you're looking at.
Yes.
And what is that in States Exhibit 111, please?
This is my CV that I provided to you that outlines my educational experience, my employment, research, publications, presentations, lectures.
Could you explain to the jury what is forensic anthropology?
A forensic anthropologist is someone who specializes in the recovery and analysis of human skeletons. So we assist coroners, law enforcement, and pathologists in the identification of people from their bones. We also look at the bones to see if there's any evidence of trauma that may have contributed to the death of the individual.
What types of things can you tell from bones?
We derive basic information about who that person was in life. So things like their age at death, how tall they were, whether they were male or female, what their ancestry is. The amount of information that we can obtain from the bones depends on whether or not that individual was an infant or a child or an adult. It also depends on the condition of the remains, so how much we have to analyze. We can look at the bones to see if there's any diseases that are evident in the bones. And like I said before, we also look to see if there's any trauma that may have contributed to the death of the individual.
How many cases do you estimate you've either handled or assisted on over your time?
Oh, hundreds of cases across the Midwestern United States and the Southern United States.
And have you testified in court before?
Yes, I have, in both federal and state court.
And which courts have you testified in?
I've testified in the states of Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Delaware.
Approximately how many times do you think you've testified?
16.
And have you been qualified as an expert in each of those times that you have testified?
Yes, I have.
And is that an expert in forensic anthropology?
Yes,
And are you certified in the field of forensic anthropology?
I am. I'm a board-certified forensic anthropologist. We are called Diplomates of the American Board of Forensic Anthropology. It's the highest achievement in the field, and it reflects high-quality research and casework, as well as a rigorous examination. There's currently only about 100 practicing forensic anthropologists in the world.
And at this time, the state would offer Dr. Latham as an expert in the field of forensic anthropology.
Does the defense wish to inquire?
No, Your Honor, we agree.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Doctor, in this case, State of Ohio versus Brooke Richardson, were you contacted by the State of Ohio to consult as an expert regarding skeletal remains that have been recovered?
Yes, you contacted me in September of 2017.
And what specifically were you requested to do, Doctor?
I was asked to analyze infant skeletal remains in order to assess the age at death and to look for any trauma that may have contributed to the death of the individual.
And I want to direct your attention to September 20th of 2017, where the skeletal remains of baby Richardson transferred to the University of Indianapolis Human Identification Center for you to conduct your scientific analysis.
Yes, they were transferred to the University of Indianapolis Human Identification Center by the Warren County Sheriff's Office.
And what did you do when you first received the remains?
First thing I did was inventory which bones were available for analysis.
Why is that important, Doctor?
Well, it's important to be able to determine the completeness of the skeleton in order to know what can be done in later analysis. It's also important to document all the different bones that were transferred to me for chain of custody purposes.
And Doctor, for purposes of your testimony today, did you prepare a PowerPoint presentation that kind of outlines some of the stuff and the topics that you're going to go over with the jury?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 112. You can take a look at that and tell me whether you recognize what you're looking at.
Yes, this is the PowerPoint that I prepared.
Is that a fair and accurate copy of the PowerPoint that you prepared?
Yes.
You indicated that the first thing that you did was you took an inventory of the bones. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I want to place on the screen page 1 of State's Exhibit 112. Could you tell the jurors, what are we looking at in this photograph, please, Doctor?
So the photograph is just all of the skeletal elements, all of the bones that I had available for analysis. And these first few slides, which are printed out at this point in time, are going to just demonstrate which elements I did not have to analyze.
And is there anything being identified in this particular slide that indicates what you did not have to analyze?
Yes, so the first slide, is there a
You
Is that
actually
the
can
pointer?
use your finger on the screen. It
Okay.
will actually show up on the big screen.
Okay, so when I had put this up as a PowerPoint, I had this first thing here highlighted to show that we're missing 3 ribs. And I have this arrow here just to demonstrate to you that the ribs are those U-shaped bones that you see in the figure there. Okay.
you touch the bottom right-hand corner.
Bottom left will clear everything, and the bottom right will clear the last thing that you
Okay.
did.
All right.
So one of the first things that we're missing is 3 ribs, is that
That's
correct?
correct.
Okay. Putting page 2 of State's Exhibit 112 on the screen, what are we looking at in this slide, please?
Okay, so this, what was bold in the PowerPoint was that we're missing 4 vertebral arches. So here, if you look at this portion of the image, those are the bones that make up the back. So that's your spinal column. And what I'm referring to are the little portions that look like parentheses here on the sides of those circles. There's 4 of those that we're missing for analysis.
Putting page 3 of State's Exhibit 112 on the screen. What are we looking at on this slide?
So here, what is bold is that we're missing 3 vertebral bodies, and that's again referring to those bones in the back. And it's the little circles that are in between the parentheses. So that's what we're referring to is missing 3 of those little circles that are located there.
Putting page 4 of State's Exhibit 112 on the screen. What are we looking at on this slide, Doctor?
Okay. Where it says that we are missing 8 manual phalanges, that's just referring to 8 finger bones that we're missing for analysis.
Putting page 5 of State's Exhibit 112 on the screen.
Okay.
What are we looking at on this slide, Doctor?
So here it says that we're missing the left tibia and fibula. And if you look at where this circle is here, that's just indicating that we are missing those lower leg bones. You see what they're supposed to look like on the opposite side over here, but we were missing both of those bones from the left side.
Putting page 6 of State's Exhibit 112 on the screen. What are we looking at with this slide?
And here it's just showing that we are missing all the bones of the ankle and the feet. So where these circles are on the figure, that's where we would have had those bones located, but those were not provided to me for analysis.
Other than the bones that you just went through with the jury, other than that, was it a complete set of the skeletal remains?
Yes, it was.
Okay. After you take an inventory of the bones, what do you do next?
In this particular case, well, what I would usually do would be to remove any soft tissues that are adhering to the bones so that I can visually observe all the bone surfaces. However, in this particular case, I was not granted permission to do so due to a court order. There were additional experts that were going to look at the remains after me, so I had to skip that step in this particular case.
Okay. Do you have a slide, though, that indicates some of that soft tissue that you're talking about as it was found on the bones?
Yes.
I'm going to put page 7 of State's Exhibit 112 on the screen. What are we looking at in this slide, Doctor?
Okay, so this is the same figure that you saw before, just showing all of the remains that were available to me for analysis. And it's mostly skeletonized, so it's mostly bare bone. But there were some soft tissues that were on some of the bone surfaces, and it was especially noticeable on the bones of the head. So I have some areas circled here on some of those bones that are showing the soft tissues that were still in place. So approximately 3 to 5% of the skeleton was covered with those tissues, so I wasn't able to analyze those surfaces.
And what was your next step in the process, Doctor?
The next thing I did in this case was to assess age at death.
Okay. And could you talk to the jurors a little bit about the way that you're able to make that determination?
For an individual that was this young, we do use a couple different techniques in order to assess age at death. So we took some bone measurements in order to see how the size of this infant was developing, what that was compared with in terms of growth and development of infants. We also looked at some developmental shape changes that occur in the bones as an individual grows and develops. And then finally, we looked at dental development, so how the teeth were developing.
Let's talk first about the bone measurements. Do you have a slide related to the bone measurements that you performed in this case?
Yes, I do.
I'm going to put page 8 of State's Exhibit 112 on the screen.
Okay.
If you could go over with the jury, what are we looking at on page 8 of State's Exhibit 112?
This was just a way for me to visually represent the bones that were measured, as well as the age that was determined from those bone measurements. So as you can see, all of the bones that were measured were consistent with an age of 38 to 40 weeks. So if we start here where it says left humerus, what we're looking at is the upper arm bone here. So it would be this part of the body that was measured and analyzed. With the left scapula, what that's referring to is this bone here, which most people refer to as their shoulder blade. So when that bone was measured, it was consistent with 38 to 40 weeks of age. The left clavicle, that's this bone here, that's your collarbone. When that bone was measured, it was consistent with 38 to 40 weeks of age. The left ulna and radius, that's just referring to these bones of the lower arm here. When those bones were measured, they were both consistent with 38 to 40 weeks of age. These next three, where it says left ilium, left ischium, and left pubis, that's referring to the bones of the pelvis. The bones that we recognize in an adult actually grow in different pieces and then fuse together. So by measuring those pieces separately, they all came back as consistent with 38 to 40 weeks of age. The left femur, that is the bone of the upper leg. When that was measured, it was consistent with 38 to 40 weeks of age. And then finally, because the bones were missing on the left side, I looked at the right tibia and fibula. Those are the bones, the two long bones in the lower leg. And when those were measured, it was consistent with 38 to 40 weeks of age.
So all of the bone measurements that you took all place this child being within the 38 to 40 week range?
That's correct.
And after the bone measurements, what did you do next?
The next thing I looked at were just some developmental changes in bone shape, and then how those different bones fuse together as an individual grows and develops. And I do have an example that I put onto the next slide to demonstrate that.
I'm going to put page 9 of State's Exhibit 112 on the screen. If you could explain to the jury, what are we looking at with this slide, Doctor?
Yes, so the bone here that's being used as the example, it's called the temporal bone. And you have temporal bones on either side of your skull. So your skull as an adult will be fused together. These are loose bones in a developing individual. And this particular bone develops in three main pieces. Here, there's a ring here that we call the tympanic portion of the bone. And that usually fuses to this flat portion of the bone here by 35 weeks of development. And those two elements were fused together in this individual. If we look at the other figure, here it's showing the other side of the bone. So the tympanic ring is fused to this flat portion, and that in turn is fused to this third portion of the bone down here. And that doesn't usually occur until around the birth of the individual, up until the first year after life. So that's showing examples of the developmental stages when we look at how those bones grow and fuse.
Then, in addition to doing that type of analysis, was there one additional type of analysis that you performed?
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, I also looked at dental development, and I did prepare another figure to illustrate that as well.
We're going to put page 10 on the screen of State's Exhibit 112. You could explain to the jury, what are we viewing on this slide, Doctor?
Okay, so when we look at the development of the dentition, and for example, what I have here are the crowns of the first molars. When we see that the development is consistent with an age of birth plus or minus 2 months. So that means that in a large comparison sample of infants, this developmental stage would be consistent with most individuals at the time of birth, but there is that error range of plus or minus 8 weeks as well. So dental development is consistent with birth plus or minus 8 weeks.
So when you looked at all of these factors when taken together, the long bone measurements, the qualitative development, and the dental development, were you able to reach a conclusion with respect to the estimated age of the child at the time of death?
Yes, I was, and I have a slide that kind of summarizes that as well.
Putting page 11 on the screen. What are we looking at in this slide, Doctor?
Yes, so because there is variation in how individuals develop, you have to look at multiple approaches in order to get an idea of an individual's age at death. And when we take all of the long bone measurements into consideration, when we looked at all of the development of the bones in terms of shape and fusion, when we looked at the dental development, all of those place this individual at full term. Now, keep in mind that the medical literature varies in how they define full term, but most of the literature puts that at between 37 and 40 weeks, and that's what we're seeing with the development here of the skeleton.
And Doctor, is that opinion that this was a full-term child of 37 to 40 weeks, is that opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
The determination that the individual was approximately full term is based on comparison to thousands of infants in many global populations. So there is a high degree of scientific certainty in terms of that determination.
In addition to estimating the age of the child, were you also asked to examine the remains for any indications of trauma?
Yes, I was.
And what did you conclude?
I think before we leave the area of age and move on to trauma, probably be a good time to break for lunch. You may. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think the attorneys are telling me, based on the anticipated time of the questioning for this witness, that we're going to press on. So we'll look to maybe break a little bit later than I originally anticipated. Mr. Knippen, you may continue.
Thank you. Doctor, I believe I was asking you, were you also asked to examine the remains for any signs of trauma that you may have seen?
Yes, I was.
And what did you conclude?
I didn't find any trauma that could have contributed to the death of the individual. I did see some alteration to the bone, but all of it was considered post-mortem, which means it would have occurred after the death of the individual.
And there was some testimony in here previously from the coroner. She noted that there were different fractures to some of the skull bones. Do you remember seeing those?
Yes.
But I want to make sure that I understand your testimony. From your examination of the remains, any of the fractures that may have occurred to the skull bones, you're indicating that would have been post-mortem, meaning after death. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
You
correct.
can't say that any of those occurred prior to the baby's death?
No.
Okay. Doctor, would you expect to see any evidence of trauma to the bones if a child was suffocated?
No, you couldn't see evidence of suffocation in the bones.
And would you expect to see any evidence of trauma to the bones if a child was drowned in water?
No, you wouldn't see evidence of drowning in the skeleton.
Okay. Did you also have an opportunity to examine the skeletal remains of the bones for any indications of burning or thermal damage? I'm sorry.
I didn't see any evidence of burning or thermal damage to any of the skeletal elements that I had to observe. Yeah.
And you're only looking at the skeletal remains, the bones themselves, is that correct?
That's correct.
Does that mean that the child could not have been burned?
I just looked at the skeleton, so I could not say if the soft tissues were burned or not. All I can say is I didn't see any evidence of burning to the skeleton.
Doctor, would it be possible to have burning to skin or tissue that doesn't go all the way down to the bone?
Yeah, so if you think about how the body's constructed, the first tissues that the flame would be in contact with would be your soft tissues. So the flame would have to burn away all those soft tissues like the skin and the muscles before it came in contact with the bone in order to char or discolor the bone underneath.
Doctor, are you aware of a report provided by a defense expert, in this case, Dr., I sometimes pronounce it correctly, Sims or Symes?
Sims.
Sims, I'm sorry.
Yes,
And did you have an opportunity to review that report?
I did.
And are you familiar with Dr. Sims?
Yes, I am.
And how are you familiar with him?
We're a relatively small field, so he's another board-certified forensic anthropologist.
Okay. When you reviewed the report from the defense expert, did you find that it differed from your report in any way?
No, we came to the same conclusions independently in terms of the approximate age of the infant at full term, that there was no thermal damage or burning that was noted to the bones, and that any of the alterations that were noted on the bones were post-mortem, meaning that they happened after the death of the individual.
Doctor, did you prepare a report summarizing your findings?
I did.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 113. You can take a look at that and tell me whether you recognize what you're looking at.
Yep, this is my complete report.
And doctor, other than the exhibit sticker that's been placed on that report, have there been any alterations or deletions made to that report?
Not that I can observe. No.
I have no further questions. Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Ritzkers, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And you and I have talked on the phone, but we've never met.
That's correct.
Bottom line, and I know I'm beating a dead horse, is that none of the fractures is evidence of any homicidal actions, correct?
All of the fractures and punctures and the abrasions, all of the alterations that were noted on the remains happened after the death of the individual.
I apologize, I don't have your report up here. I have your report. When was that dated, by the way?
I don't have it in front of me either, so I'm not sure of the exact date off the top of my
Since I
head.
filed.
The exhibit's up there on the exhibit stand.
Do you know the date?
I don't. I just know the report's up there. It's January 26th, 2018.
Approach.
You may.
If you don't mind, Doctor, look at the date.
Yes,
That's all I know.
January 26th of 2018. Okay, you're welcome.
Did you only send that report to the prosecutor?
Yes,
You didn't send it to Dr. Allen, who's now known as Dr. Brown?
I only sent a copy to the prosecutor.
By the way, I heard you say at the beginning you studied under some different forensic anthropologists. Was Dr. Sims one of those?
No.
But you know him.
Yes, sir.
And does he have a great reputation in your community of forensic anthropologists?
Yes, sir, but it's also not my job to qualify the other experts in this case.
I just wanted to know his reputation.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Knippen?
No redirect, Your Honor.
Thank you, Doctor. You can step down. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to break for lunch. Remember the things that I have previously told you. You need to stay away from any media coverage. Don't read about this case on the internet or do any investigation on your own. Also, do not begin to think about how you should decide the case or begin to talk about the case amongst yourselves. Let's plan on being back in the jury room with the idea of getting started at 1:40. Mr. Mullins, you can take the jury out. Counsel approach, please. All right, we are on the record outside the presence of the jury. All right, we had some objections at sidebar. Mr. Ricker specifically regarding the testimony of Dr. Brown. You voiced an objection to her use of some of the other reports. I think Dr. Schmidt's report, is there anything additional you want to place on the record concerning that issue?
No, Your Honor, I think we cleared it up at sidebar.
Okay. I mean, the sidebar is not part of the record, so if you want to make anything part of the record.
I don't.
All right, does the state wish to put anything of record on that?
No, Your Honor, not on that.
And I think also at sidebar, in a separate objection, there were objections from the state to the use of certain emails and correspondence and so forth. Is there anything the state wants to put of record as to those issues?
Your Honor, I had objected to the use of the email between, or the series of emails between Mr. Knippen and Dr. Murray, and then being brought into evidence or introduced into evidence by way of Dr. Brown. She was not party to those emails on either end, and I believe that they would constitute hearsay.
I apologize, hearsay.
Hearsay.
Okay, I think the cautionary instruction that I gave to the jury is sufficient. So those objections are going to remain as previously ruled upon. I think I've had the opportunity to review the autopsy report. I don't think the autopsy report requires any redaction. Is there any disagreement as to that?
Can we talk about that at a different time, Judge?
Okay.
My mind was not on that aspect.
Okay. And is Exhibit 112 an agreed upon exhibit?
That's the PowerPoint
Yes,
presentation, is that
the
correct?
PowerPoint.
We can agree, and if we can put just an exhibit sticker instead of
I've
state.
got there's an exhibit sticker on.
Just
the
as
PowerPoint.
exhibit sticker.
I'm just trying to figure out if there's going to be an objection as to that PowerPoint, because I don't know specifically that it qualifies under the expert report exception. I'll allow it in if nobody's going to object to it.
We don't have an issue as long as we can post it as a joint exhibit.
That
You have a
part I'm
problem with
okay
that? If you remember, Steve, we would have subpoenaed her had you not. We would have brought her in. So let's just do a joint exhibit. It may cut the trial short, because I don't think we may not bring in Sims based on her testimony.
So it will make everybody happy if we scribble out state and write joint, and it'll still be number 112, so we can keep track of it.
Do we have any stickers that say joint exhibit? If we do, we'll just put that right over it.
But it's still going to remain number 112 for the purposes of clarification.
Okay,
That's fine with me.
Okay.
done.
Is there anything else? All right, let's plan on being back here. Again, I'd like to start up about 1:40.
Thank you.
All right, we're in recess.
And that'll put a bow on Dr. Crystal Latham's testimony. And it seems unlike Dr. Brown's testimony, hers was short, concise, to a point, to where she would not have to be subject to the grilling that Dr. Brown got on yesterday during cross-examination. Let's just see if this will hold up. Let's just see if that'll hold up when we go to the next person to take a witness stand, and that being none other than, give me a second, maternal fetal medicine specialist Dr. Kim Brady. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the testimony begins.
Dr. Brady, can you please state your full name for the record, spelling your last?
William Kim Brady, B-R-A-D-Y.
And doctor, what is your current occupation?
I'm a physician.
And do you have a particular area of specialty?
Yes, I'm a maternal fetal medicine specialist.
And will you please explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what a maternal fetal medicine specialist is?
In the field of obstetrics and gynecology, there are 4 subspecialties. One is urogynecology, the other is GYN oncology, infertility, and maternal fetal medicine. And what my specialty entails is basically taking a pregnant mom that has any medical disorder and add pregnancy to it, from diabetes to cancer, thyroid disease, you name it. And then also, in terms of the fetal aspect of things, we do perinatal ultrasound where we make diagnosis of fetal abnormalities. We do fetal therapy and fetal surgery.
Thank you, doctor. Are you currently employed?
Yes, I am.
And with whom?
I'm currently employed with TriHealth,
And what is your business address?
375 Dick Smith Avenue, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45220,
And how long have you been so employed, doctor?
since 1991.
In addition to your role as a maternal fetal medicine specialist with Tri-State, do you have any other duties and responsibilities as they relate to your position?
Yes, I'm the director of obstetrics at Good Samaritan Hospital. I also have appointments at Bethesda North Hospital, St. Elizabeth Hospital, Children's Hospital, Mercy Hospital, and the Christ Hospital.
Thank you, doctor. Can you please tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury of your education and medical training that qualify you for your current positions?
Well, for undergraduate school, I went to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Then I went to Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, and got my Doctor of Medicine degree. I did my residency in obstetrics and gynecology in Denver, Colorado, and at the time it was Fitzsimmons Army Medical Center. Following which I served in the military, doing 3 years of general obstetrics and gynecology, followed by a fellowship in maternal fetal medicine in Washington State.
Thank you, doctor. Are you currently licensed?
Yes, I am.
In which states?
Ohio, Kentucky, Texas, Colorado, and Washington.
And how long have you held your licensure in the state of Ohio?
Since 1991.
Do you hold any board certifications, doctor?
Yes.
And in what areas?
I'm board certified in obstetrics and gynecology, as well as board certified in maternal fetal medicine.
Doctor, are you ever invited to present or give lectures in areas that are relevant to your specialty?
Yes, I've lectured at our district meetings for the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, as well as at our Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, as well as the local OBGYN Society here in Cincinnati.
And have you ever published in any books or magazines or journals or any articles in areas relevant to your specialty?
Yes, I have published a multitude of publications, not only in American Journal of Obstetricians and Gynecology, as well as what we call the Green Journal, and I also published a couple of chapters in Advances in Obstetrics and Gynecology.
Thank you, doctor. Are you a member of any professional organizations?
Yes,
And can you please identify those that are relevant to your area of specialty?
I'm a member of the American Medical Association, member of the American Institute of Ultrasound and Medicine, I'm a member of a society for maternal fetal medicine and the American College of Surgeons.
Thank you, Doctor. I'd like to talk to you for a moment about your clinical duties and ask your best estimate on how many pregnant females do you treat in a given year?
Probably involved with 1 to 2,000 pregnant women from interpreting their ultrasounds to providing direct obstetrical care and/or consultation of high-risk pregnancies.
And Doctor, I know that you have explained to us what maternal fetal medicine entails, but of those 1 to 2,000 pregnancies that you are involved with in any given year, how many of those are high risk?
Probably 75%. It's because we're a referral center, so a lot of the general obstetricians, gynecologists refer to us because of findings on ultrasound that are abnormal, or findings that they see they don't understand, or they desire consultation because of mom's condition.
Thank you, Doctor. Approximately how many babies have you delivered over the course of your career?
It's a tough estimate. I can tell you that I'm in a group of 8 and we do 500 deliveries a year, at least primary care, not excluding consultation. So of those, I do at least 45 currently a year.
Okay.
But when I came to Good Sam at 91, I was the only specialty. So I was on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 for a couple years. So back then I was doing a lot more deliveries.
Thank you, Doctor. Have you had occasion to testify as an expert in the area of maternal fetal medicine before?
Yes.
And when you testified, was your opinion accepted as expert?
Yes.
And when you've testified, has it primarily been for the state or for the defense?
Been more for the, it's been almost always for the defense.
Thank you, Doctor. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Doctor, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 114 for purposes of identification. Do you recognize that document?
Yes.
Is that your curriculum vitae?
Yes, it is.
And does that document include all of your education, training, and employment, as well as the work that you've done throughout the course of your career in the field of maternal fetal medicine?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would offer Dr. Kim Brady as an expert in the area of maternal fetal medicine.
Any inquiry from the defense? You may proceed.
Thank you. Doctor, I'd like to start out by talking to you about the topic of intrauterine growth restriction, which is commonly abbreviated IUGR. Can you tell us what it is?
Well, intrauterine growth restriction is when a fetus is not growing commensurate with gestational age. In other words, it's lagging the normal fetal growth curve.
And what is the main symptom for a child that is diagnosed with intrauterine growth restriction or fetus?
Would you repeat the question, please?
What is the main symptom? What is the first obvious thing that you see with a fetus that has intrauterine growth restriction?
Well, the baby is small, as we call it, small for its gestation. On ultrasound, it's manifested. Generally, the first signs we see is a small abdomen, because babies are like us, or adults. We lose weight in our abdomens and put on weight. And so that's one of the first signs we see of a baby that's lagging in growth on ultrasound.
When we talk about lagging in growth, and we're all familiar with growth charts that we have both during pregnancy and after, when children are born and we watch them as they grow according to the growth chart. When we're talking about babies or fetuses that are diagnosed with intrauterine growth restriction, what percentiles are we commonly talking about? What are their approximate weights?
Most commonly, they're below the 10th percentile, and that's how IUGR is defined.
Below the 10th percentile?
For gestational age, yes.
And to put that in some numbers for us, when a child is born, what types of weights or how many pounds are we typically speaking of when we talk about below the 10th percentile?
In general, at term, any baby born that weighs less than 2,500 grams is considered it's considered a small for gestational age baby, which may consist of a growth restricted baby that is basically failure to thrive in utero, or you can also have just a small baby due to genetic or constitutionally small.
Okay. We're going to back up for just a second, because a lot of us in this room don't have calculators, and we don't necessarily think the way doctors do. So when you say 2,500 grams, what are we talking about in terms of pounds?
We're talking less than 6 pounds.
Less than 6 pounds?
Roughly.
And you said something else. You said just because you have a baby that's less than 6 pounds, that's not automatically diagnostic of intrauterine growth restriction?
No.
What did you mean when you said that sometimes you just have a genetically small child based on their genetics?
Well, if you just picture a kindergarten class, you have children of all different sizes, but basically the same age. And doesn't mean they're growth restricted. It just means that they're small. And then when you look at their parents, they're small. So it's basically, we call it constitutionally small, but not necessarily growth restricted. They were just genetically destined to be small.
And so when you say genetically destined, and you're looking at a constitutionally small baby, would you in fact look at the size of their parents?
Yes.
And if you have a smaller than average mother, could that play into the size of the baby?
It could.
Doctor, how do you go about diagnosing intrauterine growth restriction?
Most commonly, we do an ultrasound, and there are various biometric parameters we look at, and we measure the baby's head, not only the diameter in the skull, but the circumference. We then look at the fetal abdominal circumference, and then we also measure the baby's femur, and we have various software programs built into our ultrasound machines and reporting systems, and it'll calculate what the estimated fetal weight is. And based on that fetal weight, of charts that have been through investigators arrive at what's appropriate for a certain gestational age, it will calculate a percentile for that baby. And if it comes up less than the 10th percentile, then we have a baby that's most likely IUGR.
Why do you take so many measurements?
Because you, just as you have tall adults, you can have tall babies, so the femur can be longer, but the rest of the baby could be smaller. So just investigations are showing that the single most sensitive parameter, what we measure, is the abdominal circumference. It's one of the first things that will fall off the curve in a baby that's developing IUGR.
Can you make a diagnosis? I mean, you've listed approximately 5 different measurements, correct?
Yes.
And that's when you're doing it by way of an ultrasound.
Correct.
Can you make a diagnosis of IUGR or intrauterine growth restriction off of just one ultrasound measurement?
No.
And is that because you don't know the genetic size of the parents?
Yes, and many times you may not even know the gestational age of the mom because she maybe didn't have prenatal care. Shows up on our doorstep and we do an ultrasound, and let's say the measurement comes out that the patient's 32 weeks pregnant. Well, is she really 32 weeks pregnant, or was she 36 weeks pregnant with a growth restricted baby?
Okay.
So you kind of need 2 points. When we have a patient, we usually date them by their last menstrual period.
Okay.
And term pregnancy is considered 40 weeks from the first day of their last period.
Okay.
In a way, we kind of lie to patients because it's not the 9 months.
Not the typical 9 months we're all looking
Right,
forward
we're adding
to.
2 weeks really to a pregnancy when we date a pregnancy. So because there's an error in ultrasound as well, let's say in the third trimester, there can be an error up to 10 to 14 days off. So we date a pregnancy at 32 weeks. The question is she 32 weeks or 36? So usually we'll repeat an ultrasound to find out, is the baby growing along its curve? And if that baby at 32 weeks, and now you do it 2 weeks later, is 34 weeks of measurements, that baby's growing pristine along its curve, and therefore the dating that was established, although late in pregnancy, is correct.
Okay.
But if we repeat the ultrasound, and then the same patient who's 32 weeks, and you do an ultrasound in 2 weeks, and that fetus only grew, say, a week in size, we can suspect that more than likely that baby's having an element of growth restriction because it's not growing along what should be a normal fetal curve.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand then. When you do the ultrasound, you're taking multiple measurements during that ultrasound,
Correct.
and then you're also doing repeat measurements at different points in time?
Correct.
So if you don't have that initial measurement or that baseline, if you will, is it possible then to compare that measurement to anything?
No. You just have one measurement time. You don't know if the dating is, it all depends too when you're in pregnancy, where you are in pregnancy. If you're in the first trimester and you do an ultrasound, you're within 5 days of when the patient's due date is calculated. So it's very accurate.
Okay.
But as you go further along in pregnancy, ultrasound is less accurate, but more so when you have more points in time to compare.
Okay. Let me ask you this. We've had a lot of discussion over the past few days about fundal height. Is fundal height an accurate measurement for intrauterine growth restriction?
No,
And why is that?
because it's a screening test.
Explain
And-
what you mean, doctor.
Well, screening tests are not diagnostic tests, and probably the best analogy to explain it is that when a woman goes in for a pap smear, and the pap smear comes back abnormal, the odds are the patient doesn't have cancer. What the patient needs is a diagnostic test, i.e. a biopsy or whatever, to make that diagnosis. But more times than not, that screening test, the patient doesn't have cancer. So it's a false positive. Same thing with when you do a fundal height measurement, it's a screening test. And usually what we do, I've been taught in textbooks that the fundal height generally is quite accurate up until about 20 weeks. And particularly the further along you go, the more the error. But generally, if you do a fundal height and it's within 3 centimeters of how many weeks the patient should be, in other words, you measure this patient, the example I gave earlier is 32 weeks. Ideally, a normally growing fetus would measure a 32 centimeter fundal height measurement. But if the patient measured 29 weeks, i.e. smaller, or if the patient measured 35 weeks, 3 centimeters greater, that usually triggers an ultrasound because you don't really know, is it really accurate? You may have decreased fluid that can give you a small measurement. You may have a big baby that gives you a large measurement. And the only way to know is an ultrasound to accurately determine, based on the parameters I said, how far along the patient is and what percentile they are on the curve.
Doctor, what is, if you know the error rate in the third trimester with fundal height measurement?
They're probably at least 60% wrong. Because as you get further along, and generally speaking, the majority of babies are born head down, you got the biggest part of the baby weighing the head down the pelvis. And studies have shown that 60% of the time after 30 weeks gestation, particularly, your fundal height measurements are wrong.
Okay. Does that error rate increase if you use your hand to do the fundal height measurement as opposed to a tape measure?
Yes,
Or can it increase?
most definitely.
Now, doctor, I want to ask you about something you just said. At that point in time, the baby starts changing position in the third trimester, correct?
Correct.
And you made mention of the baby transcending into the pelvis. What do you mean by that?
Patients, the biggest part of the baby is the fetal head. So that's why most babies are born coming head first. And just by virtue of gravity, that babies during the advancing gestational age will get lower in the pelvis. So your fundal height measurement is going to go down with advancing gestational age. Whereas if it stayed in the same position, your fundal height would continue to grow. But as it drops, your fundal heights are not commensurate with advancing gestational age.
When you talk about the baby transcending into the pelvis, is that what's also known as cephalic presentation?
Cephalic presentation just refers to the fact that the baby is head down.
So let me ask you this, doctor. Based on the way you've described it to us then, in the absence of having those serial scans, your baseline, and then however many ultrasounds you determine you're going to do subsequent to that, is it possible, based on a fundal height measurement alone, to make a diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction?
No.
Is it possible to make that diagnosis off of just a single measurement of a single bone?
No.
And I want to be clear, when we're talking about multiple measurements, you're not talking about doing like a hand palpitation fundal height measurement on one day and on that exact same day taking an ultrasound measurement of one bone. You're talking about multiple measurements over a period of time?
Yes.
Okay. So 2 measurements in one day are not what you're talking about when you're talking about serial or multiple measurements?
Correct.
Doctor, sticking with this diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction, does a diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction, if you in fact have it, result in stillbirth?
No. By far and away, the majority of growth restricted babies still are born alive.
So such a diagnosis does not presume stillbirth?
No.
Have you, in the course of your career, dealt with growth restricted babies?
Yes, every day.
And have they survived after birth?
Yes.
If you have an intrauterine growth restricted baby upon birth, what do you do?
Well, if we have a diagnosis of in utero growth restriction and we're at term, we usually recommend induction of labor. And most commonly, the babies the mother's induced for growth restriction, and we have a favorable outcome. That's why
medical treatment and they survive?
Correct. We do fetal testing on those patients so as to prevent stillbirth in babies that are significantly growth restricted.
Doctor, as part of your current employment duties, you previously indicated that on occasion you are called upon to do consultations.
Yes.
In this case, State of Ohio versus Brooke Richardson, were you requested by the Warren County Prosecutor's Office to engage in a consultation regarding 2 issues, whether she had an intrauterine growth restricted fetus and whether or not her child may have been stillborn?
Yes.
And for purposes of your consultation, did you request and subsequently review materials associated with this case?
Yes.
Do you recall when we consulted with you, my office providing you with the coroner's report?
Yes.
Dr. Elizabeth Murray's anthropological report?
Yes.
Dr. Latham's anthropological report?
Yes.
The defendant's OBGYN records from Hilltop?
Yes.
The defendant's sports physical?
Yes.
Records for her from her youth from Cincinnati Children's Medical Center records?
Yes.
Records from Dr. Lori Dunham, also from her youth?
Yes.
Records for the defendant from Cincinnati Center for Well-Being from her youth?
Yes.
Carlisle High School records?
Yes.
Both police interviews of the defendant?
Yes.
And did you also receive both of the reports authored by Dr. White?
Yes.
Doctor, in the course of your examination and consultation on this case, were you able to make findings relevant to those two issues?
Yes.
I want to talk to you about the diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction first. Based on the evidence that was presented in this case and your assessment of all of that evidence, all of the medical records, the interviews, everything that had been provided to you, was there sufficient evidence to support a diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction?
No.
You just talked to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury about the fundal height measurement.
Yes.
Are you aware that in this case, there was only one measurement ever taken of baby Richardson, and that was on April 26th?
Yes.
And that was a fundal height measurement obtained by Dr. Andrew with his hand, and one ultrasound measurement?
Objection. It's not a proper question.
I will sustain the objections to the form of the question.
Doctor, are you aware that there was a fundal height measurement obtained by Dr. Andrew?
Yes.
And are you aware that there was a preliminary ultrasound also performed on that same date?
Yes.
And that those both took place on April 26th?
Of 2017, yes.
Based on what you just explained to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, based on that one fundal height measurement and that one ultrasound measurement, why can you not make a diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction in this case?
Because it's only one point in time. And so you just presume based on whatever fundal height measurement you come up with, that's your guess as far as the gestational age. In order to make a diagnosis of IUGR, i.e. the baby's not growing, you have to have 2 points in time, whether it be an ultrasound or in your screening test, a drop off in fundal height on 2 different visits, probably at least 2 weeks apart.
And was there ever a second measurement obtained to your knowledge so that the April 26th measurement could be used as a baseline?
Not in my review of the records.
Are you aware that in that fundal height measurement obtained on that date, that Dr. Andrew estimated baby Richardson to be approximately 32 weeks?
Yes.
I know we didn't know the 2,500 grams, but when you're talking about third trimester at 32 weeks, are we now into the third trimester?
Yes, the third trimester starts at 28 weeks gestation.
So by approximately 4 weeks into that, give or take, are we now in that 60% error rate?
Yes.
And if Dr. Andrew indicated that he did the fundal height measurement with his hands, does that error rate now increase?
Yes.
Did you you said that you had an opportunity to review the Hilltop records for the defendant?
Yes.
Are you aware that in these records, it indicates that baby Richardson on April 26th was in cephalic presentation?
Yes.
How does that affect the fundal height measurement of 32 weeks?
Probably makes it more inaccurate because the baby's going to be lower in the pelvis.
And if the baby's lower in the pelvis, does that mean that the 32 weeks may in fact be greater?
Yes.
Doctor, in any of the records, is there any indication of the date of conception?
No.
So without having a date of conception, the only thing we have is that one measurement to estimate the timing or the age of this child?
Correct.
And you have nothing to compare that against?
Correct.
Doctor, if all we have is that fundal height measurement at roughly 32 weeks, we have a baby in cephalic presentation, which means we can have, even though it's a screening tool, up to a 3-week offset, taking that baby up to 35 weeks. If she is then born approximately 2 weeks later at 37 weeks, is that considered a significant lag in her growth?
No.
If she is not larger than 6 pounds, and to be fair, there's nothing in any of these records to indicate what this child's birth weight is.
Correct.
So when we talk about the size of this child, we're dependent upon whatever information we get from the defendant, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So when we talk about a growth leg of 2 centimeters or 5 centimeters, because we've heard references throughout this case already that this baby was probably closer at the time that Dr. Andrew measured her to 35 or 36 or 37 weeks. In fact, she could have measured at that point on April 26th if the appropriate testing had been done, correct?
Correct.
And so if she is then born approximately 2 weeks after that April 26th appointment, do we really have a lag in growth?
No.
Doctor, can a diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction be made off of the weight gain of the mother?
No.
Why not?
Because different patients put on different amounts of weight. And in terms of recommended weight, the recommended weight gain during a pregnancy is within even a 10-pound range as far as by most authorities. So there are patients that put on 55 pounds and there's patients that put on 15 pounds. But just because they don't put on as much weight or they put on more weight does not correlate with fetal size.
Okay. Would you also have to have accurate information as to what the mother's weight was when she conceived to know how much weight had been gained during the course of the pregnancy?
Yes.
And are you aware that in this case, there is no weight measurement in any of the information that we have for the defendant in the month of August of 2016?
Correct.
So we don't know what the defendant's starting weight was when she conceived her daughter. Would that be correct?
That is correct.
Are you aware from your review of the records that the defendant had an eating disorder?
Yes.
How does that factor in to her weight during her pregnancy?
It may have affected her weight gain. We don't know. Unfortunately, we don't have any points in time other than the one on 426, which she weighed at that time. And if I recall, it was around 147 pounds.
147 pounds in April of 2016, or I'm sorry, 2017?
I believe.
Okay. In your experience, individuals that have an eating disorder, does their weight fluctuate?
Yes.
Do you have any information in this case provided by the defendant or otherwise as to what her weight was in September of 2016?
No idea.
October of 2016?
No idea.
November of 2016?
No idea.
All the way up until the first weight we get is in April.
Correct.
Do you have any information as to when she first started showing? Her belly started protruding a little bit.
No.
Do you know or have any information that when her belly started protruding and you factor in her eating disorder, if she took any steps to try and decrease her weight gain at that time?
No idea.
So you have no information about what her weight was when she conceived or what her weight was for any of the 9 months plus 2 weeks following?
Correct.
You don't know if her weight went up, down, stayed the same, anything?
Correct.
And you said a weight gain of only 15 pounds. Again, that's not diagnostic of intrauterine growth restriction?
No.
Doctor, when you reviewed the Hilltop medical records, were you aware that blood work had been done on that date?
Yes.
Tell me this, when an individual is pregnant, the food that we consume, the nutrients that we consume, everything that is coming into our body, is that going first to the mother or first to the child?
First to the mother, digested converted into nutrition within the bloodstream, which then passes the placenta to the fetus.
And mom gets what's left over?
Correct.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Doctor, I'm showing you the defendant's blood work for April 26th of 2017.
Okay.
Is there anything in her blood work to indicate that her nutritional status was anything other than within the normal range?
No. And the first thing we look at is, for those of you that go to your doctor and they do a blood count, what we're really measuring is the hemoglobin and hematocrit. And the hemoglobin is 12.1 grams per deciliter, and the hematocrit here was 36.1%, both of which are in normal limits. And if there was a nutritional issue, one of the first things usually to go down on your blood is your blood count or your hemoglobin. And I'm sure you've all heard of anemia. Some people might have trouble absorbing iron if they're taking supplements, but most commonly, if you have any nutritional issues going on, you're going to reflect it, and it's going to manifest as anemia on your blood count.
And is there any indication on her April 26, 2017 blood work that she is anemic?
No,
Even close to it?
no, completely normal range.
Doctor, you're aware that an ultrasound was also performed at that appointment?
Yes,
By the time that the baby reaches 32 weeks, plus or minus, because all we have is that fundal height measurement to go off of, would you expect, because you've talked a little bit on growth restricted babies about how we see a difference in their head to abdomen ratio, correct?
correct.
By 32 weeks, would you expect that to be visible on an ultrasound?
Yes. Because we do when we do ultrasound measurements through the body or the trunk, we're doing cross sections. So it's like taking a tree and chopping it off at the stump and looking down on that stump. And so if you've looked at the baby's head and you've come down and done a cut through the abdomen, you will see a discrepancy, the head being larger than the abdomen, if indeed you have growth restriction, just by a gestalt look, without actually doing measurements if there's significant IUGR to the extent that would cause fetal death. And again, babies are parasites. They take what they need at mom's expense in terms of growth.
Some of these babies that are also intrauterine growth restricted and are at risk of fatality, do they tend to have some dysmorphic features?
They can, yes.
And is that something that would also be evident on an ultrasound?
Yes, assuming the person performing the ultrasound has done ultrasound. But most OBGYNs have ultrasound training during the course of their residency. In fact, it's required.
Thank you, doctor. At 32 weeks, plus or minus, or up to 35 weeks, would you also expect on an ultrasound to see evidence of a decrease in amniotic fluid?
Yes,
You are aware that in this case, when Dr. Andrew performed the ultrasound, he indicated that the baby had a fetal heart rate of 140.
yes.
What does that indicate to you, doctor?
That's a normal heart rate. Fetuses in the third trimester, or after 20 weeks really, have a heart rate between 120 and 160. And it varies. And it varies in relative to baby's movements. When baby moves, the heart rate goes up just like you or I running down the hall. And that's a good physiologic response. So the next time you measure baby's heartbeat and it's 150, it's in the normal range. It just depends on what the baby was doing just before you measured the heart rate.
So doctor, when we have this ultrasound and there's anywhere from 32 to 35 weeks, no indication that we have a growth-restricted baby, no indication of any inequality between the head to abdomen ratio, no indication of low fluids, and we have a solid heart rate of 140. What does that indicate?
Generally means the baby is healthy.
And if we have a healthy baby on April 26th of 2017, would you expect to have a significant change in the outcome of that child in 1.5 weeks?
Yes. I would expect the baby to still be alive.
Still be alive?
Yes.
Thank you, doctor. When you look at everything that's been provided to you and everything that we've just discussed, is there anything in these records or anything in the defendant's statement to indicate this was an intrauterine growth-restricted baby?
Not that I could glean from the records.
Let's talk a little bit more about stillbirth. There have been a lot of questions posed of some of the other doctors in this case about the condition of baby Richardson at birth. The defendant indicated in her interview that she doesn't know whether the cord was attached or not. What, if anything, does that mean to you?
It means absolutely nothing, because the definition of a live birth in the state of Ohio is a baby born after 20 weeks gestation, whether the cord's attached or the baby's attached to or the cord's attached to the placenta, makes no difference. The baby has movement, respiratory effort, and a heartbeat. Doesn't matter whether the cord's attached or not, that's a live born.
There's been discussion about there might not have been a lot of amniotic fluid because she doesn't know if her water broke or not. What does that mean to you, doctor?
We have women coming into our triage unit daily that question whether their water's broke. We have patients come in bleeding that just present with bleeding and come to find out part of them, their water was broke, mixed with a little blood. It doesn't take much blood, for example, to turn the toilet red. Just a few drops in the toilet turns it red. So you could assume you could have blood, when indeed it's amniotic fluid, or just all blood. So it's often difficult to tell as a patient, particularly if somebody has never delivered before, whether they've lost their fluid, just bloody show, whatever.
And is it, if a female while she's pregnant has a little bit of blood or what have you, does that mean that the baby's going to be stillborn?
No.
Is it typical for women to spot during their pregnancy?
Yes.
What are
Up to
some
20%
things,
of patients will have spotting during the course of their pregnancy, or 1 in 5.
and for what reasons?
It can be just cervical irritation. The cervix, during the course of pregnancy, hormonal change, the cells on the cervix migrate to the outside of the cervix. It's kind of like, when you look at a cervix, it's like a raw scraped knee. So if a woman's been doing a bunch of housework, bending over, whatever, just scraping that cervix against the vaginal wall can lead to bleeding. So there's many causes of bleeding. Cervical dilation can cause bleeding.
Can vigorous exercise cause bleeding?
Yes.
Doctor, you said you had an opportunity to also look at both of her interviews.
Yes.
You're aware that prior to her daughter's birth and subsequent to her appointment, she had indicated that she could feel the baby moving inside of her.
Yes.
Does a dead baby move?
No.
You're aware that the only person that has knowledge as to the size of Baby Richardson as the defendant, correct?
Yes. And when we look at fetal movement, we put all our patients on what we call fetal chart movement.
It's not a response to a question.
I'll sustain the objection. Ask your next question.
Doctor, I asked you if a dead baby can move inside of the mother, and you said no.
No.
Can you explain?
Babies are no different than adults. If an adult drops dead on the floor of a heart attack, they're not going to move. A baby in utero that's not alive is not going to move. Now, if you jumped up and down, you might, depending on where you are in gestation, you might feel it. But other than that, no.
So if the defendant, by her own statement, is indicating that she's feeling movement within inside of her, that is indicative of a live fetus?
Yes.
I was starting to ask you, are you aware that the only person that has ever laid eyes on baby Richardson is the defendant?
Yes.
And so she's the only one that knows what baby Richardson looked like when she was born?
Correct.
Were you also aware from reviewing her records that she worked at Child Watch?
Yes.
And that was a daycare at the YMCA, and that she worked with infants as young as 6 weeks of age.
Yes.
So she had some knowledge of babies.
Yes.
Are you aware that in her interview, she described baby Richardson as she was kind of big?
Yes.
She didn't say she was kind of small, she said she was kind of big.
Yes.
Is that indicative of a small baby or a particularly tiny baby?
I presume she's seen different sized babies and she would know the difference.
Thank you. When you reviewed her transcripts, are you aware that she indicated to the investigators when questioned, was she moving at all, a little kick or anything, and she said maybe?
Yes.
Were you aware that when interviewed by the investigators, she said that she thinks she made a noise
Yes.
and that she made a gurgle
Yes.
and that she moved
Yes.
and that her arms in particular were moving?
Yes.
Are you aware that when they questioned her about how long her daughter was alive, she said 5 minutes?
Yes.
Are you aware that throughout her interview, she talked about squeezing her daughter?
Yes.
And are you aware that when they questioned her about the timing of the squeezing versus the crying of her daughter, she said that she was crying before she squeezed her? Just a little crying, just a little crying.
Yes.
Doctor, in your experience, babies that cry and gurgle and move their limbs, are those dead babies?
No.
Are those signs of life,
Yes.
not indicative of a stillbirth?
Not indicative of stillbirth.
Doctor, in this case, were you given the reports from the doctor that the defense retained, Dr. John White?
Yes.
And are you familiar with Dr. John White?
Yes.
How do you know him?
He's a general obstetrician gynecologist at the Christ Hospital, or practices out of the Christ Hospital.
He's not a maternal fetal specialist, correct?
Correct.
When he has a high-risk pregnancy or a high-risk baby, does he consult with you? With your
Yes.
practice?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
I'm showing you two reports authored by Dr. White. You've seen those before and had the opportunity to review them?
Yes.
When you are involved in a case, if you're presented with information or an opinion that's different from yours, are you willing to take it into consideration?
Yes, I'll take it into consideration.
When you read those reports, did anything that Dr. White put in his reports change your opinion on this case?
No.
You're aware that he has made a diagnosis of both intrauterine growth restriction and stillbirth?
Yes.
I'd like to go through those reports with you, if you will, starting with the February 7th report. Dr. White starts out by indicating that Ms. Richardson delivered a term female infant approximately 39 weeks.
Correct.
Do you agree with that?
Yes.
And that this was based on a femur length?
Yes.
That is the femur length, if you're aware, that was obtained by the anthropologist post-mortem. Is that correct?
That is correct.
There was never a femur length done in this case, was there?
No.
He indicates in his second point that based on that 39-week guess as to the age of baby Richardson, that Miss Richardson's likely conception date was around August 21st of 2016. Do you agree, based on your review of the records, that that is at least consistent with the timing of the relationship that she had with the baby's father?
Yes.
In his next point, he goes on to say that the pregnancy was likely complicated by intrauterine growth restriction. Would you agree?
Could you restate your question again, please?
In his third point, he goes on to indicate that he believes Miss Richardson's pregnancy was likely complicated by intrauterine growth restriction.
That's what he states.
And he says this is based on a fundal height measurement of 32 weeks, correct?
Correct.
And based on that 32-week measurement and the fact that she had a baby a week and a half later, that there is, in fact, a 5-week leg in growth for baby Richardson.
That's what he says, yes.
Do you agree with that?
No,
Why not?
because of the inaccuracy of fundal height measurements after 30 weeks particularly.
So if we go back to our original questions, if that 32-week fundal height measurement, which was done by hand, is inaccurate by 3 centimeters, and baby Richardson was in fact 35 weeks, and then born approximately 1.5 weeks to 2 weeks later, we're now up to almost 37 weeks, correct?
Correct.
Objection. Improper question.
At that point, if a baby is born at approximately 37 weeks, would that be considered close to full term?
Yes.
Is that a 5-week leg then?
No.
He does not mention anywhere in there when discussing the 32-week fundal height that baby Richardson was already in cephalic presentation, does he?
No.
But that information was contained in her obstetrical report.
Correct.
He then goes on to talk about her weight gain. And he uses a sports physical done in July of 2016 in which she was 134 pounds, compares that to her weight on April 26th, and definitively says she only had a 15-pound weight gain. Is there any way, without knowing how much she weighed on the date she conceived and how much she weighed at every other month from that date until the baby's birth, what her weight gain is?
No, there's no documentation of weight at all.
And again, this is an individual that has an eating disorder.
Correct.
And there's no indication in here of whether her weight was going up or down or what she was doing during that period of time, is there?
That is correct.
You've said that we can't make a diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction off of the mother's weight,
Correct.
but can we even assume that this 15-pound weight gain that he identifies in his report is accurate?
No.
Does he mention anywhere in here or make any reference to her blood work and how she was within normal range on every measurement in her blood work?
No.
From that, he goes on to say there's a significant likelihood that Miss Richardson delivered a stillbirth. So that's based on this 32-week fundal height that he is definitive about, a 5-week leg that he is definitive about, and her 15-pound weight gain that he is definitive about. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In any of the records that have been presented, is there any indication, and he talks about the reason that we're at risk of having a stillbirth here is because there was no gush or apparent leakage of fluid. Is there anything in here to indicate that there was a gush or was not a gush?
No.
Is there anything in these records or noted by Dr. Andrew to give any indication of whether or not there were any dysmorphic features on ultrasound or whether the head to abdomen ratio was in line with what it should be?
No.
He talks about the cord. So let's talk about that a little bit. He accepts her statement that the cord was not attached when the baby came out.
Correct.
And I think you've touched on this already, but the cord not being attached, is that diagnostic of a stillbirth?
No.
Okay. Talk to us about the cord. What does it do?
The umbilical cord delivers nutrition, oxygen from the placenta to the fetus.
She doesn't know if it's attached or not. She makes references to it being attached. She makes references to it not being attached, but she doesn't know if it was attached. And then she also makes references that it wasn't attached, correct?
Correct.
If the baby comes out, for sake of argument, without the cord being attached to the placenta, does that give you any indication as to the timing of when it could have detached?
No.
How long is the umbilical cord?
It's about 55 centimeters. There's 2.2 centimeters in an inch, so it's around 25 inches.
Okay. One end attached to mom and one end attached to the baby. The end that is attached to mom, describe how the cord attaches to the mother.
Well, it attaches to the placenta, and the placenta thereby attaches to the uterine wall. So if you think of the placenta as being around, about the size of between a dinner plate and a small salad plate, that part being attached, the umbilical cord is then, the placenta is attached to the uterine wall, then the umbilical cord is attached to the middle of the placenta generally, that then goes to the baby at the side of your umbilicus, or your belly button.
Okay. Is it easier to cut the cord, or is it easier for the cord to break away from the placenta?
It's much easier to cut the cord,
How so?
because you're using sharp scissors.
Okay.
The cord has a gel, and it's sort of like you can tether and stretch it, because when we actually do a delivery, one of the first things we do, when we clamp the cord, we stretch the cord, so we have a distance or whatever, so we can cut the cord. And nowadays we're sending cord segments on all babies to the lab for drug screens.
Okay. Let's assume, because we don't know, but let's assume the cord was not cut. Is it possible for it to break away from the placenta?
It's possible, yes.
How so?
Well, if you delivered, say, in a standing up position or even from a bed, and say the baby were to drop to the floor, you only got like 25 inches from within mom to the floor. It could easily, or depend on the weight of the baby, I should say.
Can the
Could-
weight of the baby break the cord?
Correct.
Now, I know that most situations that we're familiar with, you're in the hospital, correct?
Yes.
Mother's laying in a bed and you're helping to bring the baby out
Yes.
into the world. And so the cord comes out with the baby. There's really not the pressure or the weight of the baby pulling that cord, correct?
Correct.
If you're not in that situation and you said you're in a standing or seated position and the baby is actually dropping out of you and there's nothing to catch or no one to catch, or Dr. Brady's not at the other end to help bring that baby out, is that what you're talking about? That when the baby drops out, the weight of the baby can pull on that cord?
Yes.
And in that circumstance, can the weight of the baby break the cord?
Yes.
Does that mean that the cord was broken prior to?
No.
Are you aware that there's no indication in any of these records that there was anyone to catch the baby, that she fell out of the defendant?
That's my understanding.
And if you're seated and there is a distance from you to the floor of 25 inches, would that be enough distance?
Yes.
What if you are holding on to something and bent over and the baby drops out of you to the floor? Would that be enough distance and weight from the baby to break the cord?
Yes.
What if when the baby drops out, you pick the baby up while it's still attached? Could the motion of bringing that baby upwards towards you avulse or sever the cord?
It could, yes.
So the fact that the cord may or may not have been attached at the time baby Richardson finally came out of her mother, can you attach any significance to that?
No.
In her interview, and Dr. White makes reference to it, when asked about the color of her child, Miss Richardson indicated that she was white. What significance do you attach to that, doctor?
None.
And why is that?
Some babies come out blue, some come out pale, some come out pink. But they can all have normal heart rates. So I don't attach much significance at all to it.
In your career, have you had the experience of delivering a stillborn child?
Yes, unfortunately,
Many times?
many times.
And typically, what color are they?
White, pale, gray, depends how long they've been dead in utero.
Does the color of the baby alone at the time of birth give you any indication that this was a stillborn child?
No.
Dr. White goes on to talk about the likelihood of this being an IUGR baby and that there was a fetal death is made more significant due to the short period of time that Miss Richardson was in labor. Does the duration of labor indicate that this was a stillborn baby?
No.
Are you aware from your review of all the materials in this case and the defendant's own statement that she was cramping and having significant back pain and knew that that's what was happening throughout the entire day leading up until the birth of her daughter?
Could you repeat the question again, please?
Are you aware from a review of her statements in the transcripts that she told the detectives that she was having a lot of pain in her back, sharp pains, that was going on throughout the entire day leading up until that night when she had her daughter.
Yes.
That at points she was laying on a heating pad trying to help with the pain that she was experiencing,
Yes.
and that she knew what was happening.
Yes.
If a mother labors all day long and into the night, having the baby at approximately 3 a.m., is that considered a short labor?
No. It's pretty typical labor.
Dr. White then concludes his first report by talking about this mammalian dive reflex, and that any gurgling sounds that might have been heard were by virtue of the baby being born into the toilet. Do you agree with that, doctor?
No.
And why is,
Overruled.
and why is that?
You shouldn't hear any gurgling out of a stillborn.
Can dead babies gurgle?
No.
On March 28th, we have a second report from Dr. White, correct?
Yes.
And at this point in time, there's no more, it's indicative of, it suggests that now he definitively says, we have IUGR and we have a stillbirth, correct?
Correct.
Ms. Kraft, I apologize for interrupting your examination. I think it probably makes sense for us to go ahead and take a break at this point. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take our afternoon break. Remember what I have previously told you. Do not begin to think about how this case should come out or talk about the case amongst yourselves. We will plan on being back here at about 10 after 3. Mr. Mullins, you can take the jury out. Counsel, approach, please.
And as they break, I'm cutting in just put my 2 cents on this. And all I can say is that the direct examination, as important as it may be, right now it's just droning on and on and on about the difference between a live birth and a stillborn baby. Maybe just coinciding with what Brooke Skylar Richardson said at the outset before allegedly burying the child. I'm kind of interested to see how the defense is gonna cross-examine this doctor who's right now is showing that he knows a little something about maternal fetal medicine. Or will he end up like Dr. Brown in our last installment, the forensic pathologist who just got literally and figuratively roasted? Let's go back into the courtroom and let the testimony.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Was everybody able to follow my instructions and admonitions over the break?
Yes, sir.
All right, Ms. Kraft, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. I apologize, Your Honor, if I can have 1 second. Okay, doctor, I believe where we left off, we were on the second report dated March 28th from Dr. White. And he is now, instead of using the term likely, has, in this report, indicated that this is definitively an IUGR baby in stillbirth. Is there, when you look at this report, do you see any indication that there's new information that's been provided to him to change his position?
No.
One of the things that he changed in his report, if you look at number 6, was the date of conception for baby Richardson. And he says that the likely conception occurred in July 2016, and that based on that, her physical that she had for school, indicating that she was 134 pounds, now gives us a weight for the date of conception. Would you agree with that?
No, there's no way of knowing what the weight would have been at conception, regardless.
You agree, though, that he changed the conception date from his February 7th report, where he indicated that the likely conception date was around the end of August, and now moved it to July of 2016?
Yes.
Are you aware from the review of the records that Miss Richardson and the baby's father were not even involved in July of 2016?
No.
If I were to indicate to you that they have both indicated that the relationship occurred over the month of August of 2017, would you accept that as accurate?
Yes.
So do you have any idea why he changed the conception date, or what that change would have been made based upon?
No, not unless he backtracked from information regarding the anthropology information, if it was available at the time.
He continues in this report to indicate that he is certain that we have a 32-week-old baby, or a 32-week-old fetus, on April 26th, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, that is absolutely not what he says.
Ladies and gentlemen, for the purposes of expert testimony, and I sort of told you this a little bit earlier, an attorney is allowed to ask a witness to accept a certain set of facts and to determine whether or not that set of facts changes the expert's opinion. It is your job as the jurors to determine whether or not those facts match up to the facts that have been proven as evidence in the case. So I will overrule the objection. Ms. Kraft, it does make sense to rephrase your question, though.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, you would agree that in his third point, he again references that we have a 32-week fundal height, 32-centimeter fundal height, which would make this a 32-week-old fetus, correct?
Correct.
And that it is his opinion that this is now a 37-week fetus, and that when we then go down to his fourth point, we have in fact a 5-centimeter leg and fundal height.
That's what he states, yes.
But this is still based upon that April 26th fundal height measurement done by Dr. Andrew with his hand, correct?
Correct.
And based on a hand measurement at 32 weeks, can we definitively say that on April 26th, baby Richardson was 32 weeks?
No.
Doctor, you, based on your entire examination of this case, all of the records, the reports that were authored by Dr. White, were you able to reach a conclusion as to whether or not there was sufficient evidence to make a diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction for baby Richardson?
No.
Were you able to form an opinion?
I have opinion of, I have no idea whether this baby was growth restricted or not, based on the information.
And let me You were asked to engage in a consultation to make a determination as to whether or not there was sufficient evidence to make a diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction, correct?
Correct.
And you were also asked to review everything to determine if there was sufficient evidence to make a diagnosis of stillbirth, correct?
Correct.
And do you believe that you were able to review all of the information pertinent to this case to answer those two questions?
Yes.
Okay. And once you had completed your consultation, did you write a letter containing your assessment and conclusions?
Yes.
And in fact, you have two letters, correct?
Correct.
One, I believe, indicates what your opinion is,
Yes.
and the other one references all of the materials that you reviewed in your consultation on this case.
Yes.
And those are marked, I believe the first one is State's Exhibit 115 for purposes of identification. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the second one, dated April 9th of 2018, is 116 for purposes of identification.
Yes.
Doctor, can you please read the contents of your letter to the jury for State's Exhibit 115?
The whole letter?
Yes, please.
All right, the letter is addressed to Julie A. Kraft, dated March 15, 2018. Dear Ms. Kraft, per your request, I've reviewed the following records, which you sent me regarding State versus Brooke, Skylar, Richardson. First record is Hilltop OBGYN medical records. Second document is coroner's report. Third document is Dr. Latham's report, the state's anthropologist. Fourth document, sports physical, July of 2016. And the fifth document is the defense expert report. Having had the opportunity to review the aforementioned documents, I conclude the following. 1. Ms. Richardson was seen by Dr. Andrew on 4/26/17, at which time she presented for oral contraceptive pill prescription. Subsequent physical exam demonstrated that she was pregnant with a fundal height of 32 centimeters, suggestive of a gestational age approximating 32 weeks gestation. Fetal cardiac activity was documented with a fetal heart rate of 140 beats per minute, which is within the normal range. Fundal height measurements in centimeters between 18 and 30 weeks gestation has been shown to coincide with weeks of gestation. However, at 32 weeks gestation and greater, fundal height measurements can be inaccurate as the fetus descends lower in the pelvis. The patient was instructed to return to his office in 1 week for an obstetrical sonogram to presumably more accurately date her gestation. Number 2, fundal height measurements are a screening tool for fetal growth abnormalities. However, its principal drawback is imprecision. Investigators have reported that fundal height measurements correctly identify only 40% of small for gestational age or growth-restricted fetuses. Thus, growth-restricted fetuses are both overlooked and overdiagnosed 60% of the time, utilizing fundal height measurement only. Therefore, one cannot conclude that Ms. Richardson's fetus was growth-restricted without being incorrect over half the time. Number 3, Ms. Richardson's height was 5 feet 2 and weight was 134 pounds on an OHSAA pre-participation physical exam performed on July 13, 2016, over 9 months prior to her initial visit to Dr. Andrews' office on the day her pregnancy was diagnosed on 4/26/17. A patient's weight with an eating disorder fluctuates up and down. Although Ms. Richardson weighed 149 pounds on 4/26/17 and was sometime in her 3rd trimester, it is not known what her weight actually was shortly after conception nor any time during her pregnancy until that initial visit on 4/26/17. Therefore, one cannot determine how much weight gain Ms. Richardson experienced during the pregnancy, nor make any assertion regarding her caloric intake and or nutritional status during the course of her pregnancy. Although Ms. Richardson's hemoglobin hematocrit drawn on 4/26/17 was 12.1 grams per deciliter and 36.1% respectively, both within the normal range. If she were truly poorly nourished, she most likely would have been anemic, i.e. iron deficient, which she obviously was not. Number 4, given the lack of accuracy of a fundal height screening measurement, 60% of the time, and the absence of good ultrasound gestational age dating, one cannot hypothetically extrapolate that Ms. Richardson's fetus was growth restricted on the day of delivery. Number 5, the average duration of active labor in first pregnancies approximates 8 hours. The duration of labor is not directly correlated to the size of the fetus. In summary, one cannot conclude, based on review of the aforementioned records, that Ms. Richardson's fetus was growth restricted and or stillborn. If you have any questions regarding my review of the case, please contact me. Signed, myself.
Doctor, in your April 9th letter, were you given additional materials to review as they became available?
I had a second report review by Dr. John White, dated March 28, 2018.
Carlisle High School record?
Yep, and Carlisle High School record, cover letter dated August 8. Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center records, the cover letter dated September 15, 2017. Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center medical records of Brooke S. Richardson, date of birth 3/9/99, with a cover letter dated August 24.
Ms. Kraft, it's not your intention to have this witness just read these reports, right?
No.
Okay, let's go ahead and get to a question then, please.
All of the records that are listed in this second letter, April 9th, 2018, did you take those into consideration as well when reaching a conclusion in this case, Doctor?
Yes,
Based on your review of everything you had initially and based on all of the information that was supplemented, did any of those new documents or materials or records in any way change the opinion that you indicated you had in the first letter?
no,
Doctor, if the defense had requested that you write your first letter, would it have been the same letter?
yes,
Based upon your review of the case, the medical evidence, and the defendant's own statements, is it possible in this case to make a diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction?
no,
Doctor, based upon your review of this case, the medical evidence, and defendant's own statements, is it possible in this case to make a diagnosis that the defendant's daughter was stillborn?
no.
Your Honor, if I may have a moment.
You may.
Doctor, with regards to both of those questions regarding the diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction and the diagnosis of stillbirth, do you hold those opinions to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, Doctor.
Mr. Vickers, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm Charlie Rickers. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
And you and I have never talked, have we?
Not to my knowledge, no.
You were paid by the prosecutors to come in here and give your opinion, correct?
Yes,
Can you tell us how much you were paid to do all the work and come in here and give your opinion?
so far I've been paid nothing.
Can you tell us how much you're going to charge for your work and your opinion?
For a court appearance, we charge, as members of our group, we charge $5,000 a day for a court appearance because that's usually what it costs in our practice when we're away from our practice.
What about the 8 hours of the interrogation tapes and preparing your report, do you charge for that also?
Charge $500 an hour.
And do you have a recollection as to how many hours you put into preparing the report, looking at everything?
Not off the top of my head. My secretary keeps my hours.
And fair enough. I heard when Ms. Kraft was asking you a question about you're testifying as an expert in cases, and she asked you, do you primarily testify for the state or for the defense? And your answer was, you testify for the defense. You remember that?
Correct.
And that's true, isn't it?
Yes.
And when you're testifying for the defense, though, you're talking about civil cases, aren't you?
Correct.
Is this the first criminal case you've ever testified in?
Yes.
Thank you. So, you don't testify for plaintiffs in med-mal cases. You testify for defendants, meaning defendant doctors in med-mal cases for the defense.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, you indicated that you know Dr. John White, who will be testifying here next week, correct?
Yes.
And you've come in here today to tell the jury that Dr. White is all wrong, correct?
Pretty much, yes.
And you know Dr. White's reputation in the obstetrics and gynecology community, don't you?
Yes.
And he's very respected, isn't he?
Yes.
And in fact, you're aware that Dr. White was an expert in a case where two of your residents, where you were the attending physician, had been sued for malpractice. You're aware of that, aren't you?
No.
Doctor, you familiar with the case of Jazz Gaines versus Tri-Health and Good Samaritan Hospital?
Don't recall, no.
You don't recall?
What year was that?
That's a great question. I don't know if I brought the actual complaint with me. Tri-Health is your group, though, isn't it? Isn't it?
My employer.
It's your employer. I'm sorry, your employer. And you are at times an attending physician, correct?
Yes, we cover resident cases.
I don't have the timestamp copy, Doctor, of the actual complaint. I only have the non-timestamp copy.
All I can state is I know that I've never been in court for a malpractice case myself.
Yeah, I didn't say you were. You were not the one sued. It was the two residents where you were the attending physician. And do you have any recollection whatsoever when you were attending physician and your two residents, when two of your residents had been sued for malpractice?
No.
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point.
Overruled. Go ahead.
If I were to tell you that Dr. White was chosen to be one of the experts to defend those two residents in that malpractice case, you wouldn't disagree with that, would you?
No.
Dr. White, are you a member of, what is it, ACOG? ACOG?
Yes.
And that stands for American College of...
Obstetricians and gynecologists.
And ACOG produces a bulletin? Is that what you call it? A practice bulletin?
Yes.
Is that weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly?
It's whenever they feel that there's a need for a clarification in the guidelines of practice, they publish it. So there's no, doesn't necessarily come out every month.
I got you.
Or there's no
But it just
time-
comes out
there's no
when-
timeline.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Just comes out when they feel it's necessary to give physicians, obstetricians, and gynecologists new guidelines or guidelines on how to treat patients, et cetera, right?
Correct.
And obstetricians and gynecologists rely on that, don't they?
Yes.
You rely on it, don't you?
Yes.
Did you write any articles for that, by the way?
No.
Not sure. I'm going to show the jury if I can have some help. I marked this as Defendant's Exhibit HHHH. You don't need it. I'm just referring for the record. Okay. This is one of those practice bulletins that we were talking about. You can see it on your monitor, is that correct?
Yes.
At the very top, it looks like it was originally published May of 2013, correct?
Correct.
And over on the right that I'm circling, it was reaffirmed 2018, correct?
Correct.
Meaning it's up to date. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm referring next, and you can see it on your monitor there. I think it's like on maybe the third page of this bulletin. It says clinical considerations and recommendations, correct?
Correct.
And right under that, what I've highlighted, could you read that for me, please?
From the top.
No, what I highlighted, where it starts with fundal height measurements.
Okay. Fundal height measurements should be performed at each prenatal care visit after 24 weeks of gestation. A discrepancy between weeks of gestational age and fundal height measurement of greater than 3 centimeters have been proposed for identifying a fetus that may be growth restricted.
So, as I understand that, they're suggesting to all the obstetricians should be using the fundal height, and if they think that there is a 3 centimeter lag, then they need to check further, don't they?
Yes.
Thank you. The next paragraph that I highlighted, could you read that for us, please? A little bit more slowly so that the jury can understand what you're reading.
Although other approaches to fetal growth restriction screening have been studied, including universal third trimester ultrasonography, uterine artery and Doppler velocimetry, and measurement of analytes such as pregnancy-associated plasma protein A, there is no evidence that these fetal growth restriction screening methods improve outcomes.
So what are they saying there, doctor? Are they saying fundal height is as good as these other things that you had just mentioned or you just read?
No, what it's saying is that these additional methods don't necessarily improve outcomes. It says nothing about establishing the diagnosis of IUGR.
Doctor. I'm going to show you what's on page 2. Move it this way for me. Oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. Yeah, that's good. The very bottom of that, perinatal morbidity, mortality, morbidity. Can you read that for us, please?
The bottom line that's highlighted?
It's at the bottom. Right here.
Okay. Fetal growth restriction increases the risk of intrauterine demise, neonatal morbidity, and neonatal death.
Okay. Now, could you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that means, the intrauterine demise? What's that mean?
Yes, intrauterine demise is where the baby succumbs in utero, in other words, an intrauterine death. Neonatal morbidity is where, first off, a neonate is defined as a newborn within the first 30 days of life. So if you have a baby that's fetal growth restricted, there's an increased risk of complications in the neonatal period. For example, inability to control their temperature, failure to feed, infections, because they're smaller babies, and of course then neonatal death. So they're at higher risk for neonatal death.
Thank you very much. Now, going up the page,
Mr. Rickers, Dr. Brady, it might just be me, or it might just be the lateness of the week, but I'm having trouble hearing a little bit, so if everybody could elevate your voices and maybe move in the direction of the microphone, that might help.
I'm sorry, I've got this drawer out here. I apologize. Can you all hear me? Sorry. Doctor, if you could refer, please, to what's now on your screen, and it's that box. Could you read that at the top with that first headline?
The headline says, Etiology of Fetal Growth Restriction.
And what does that mean, etiology?
Means potential causes of fetal growth restriction.
And at the very bottom that I highlighted, what does that say?
It says placental disorders and umbilical cord abnormalities.
Thank you. We're done with that. The doctor is I don't know if it's called a journal, but obstetrics and gynecology, and I understand you've written articles for that.
Yes,
Does that come out monthly, yearly, what?
monthly.
And doctor, I read in there, and I apologize, I don't have the date, but let me put it here. Well, I'll read it to you. This is in the discussion part. It says fetal growth restriction is associated with increased perinatal morbidity and mortality. The rate of stillbirth is double that in the general population when birth weight is 15 to 25% below normal. You agree with that?
Yes,
In fact, you co-authored this.
yes.
Doctor, when in your practice, and hopefully in every obstetrician's and gynecologist's practice, keeping an accurate record, the medical chart, which is the medical records of a patient, correct?
Correct.
Keeping an accurate record is very important, is it not?
Yes.
And so, there's been a lot of debate here about whether Dr. Andrew actually put in his chart 32 weeks that he measured with the fundal height at 32 centimeters. If you put it in a chart, would you accept that as fairly accurate, at least as to what he wrote in that chart?
Yes, I had no reason not to believe him.
Thank you. Doctor, Ms. Kraft was talking about the information that you were provided, and that was provided by the prosecution, correct?
Yes.
And I don't know if you mentioned it, but an important piece of information I think that she may not have shared with you, or not intentionally, by the way, is the police report of Detective Carter, where Detective Carter reports that she and Detective Fain interviewed Trey Johnson, who was the father of this child. Did you see that?
No.
I'm going to show you part of that report. There, at the top there, that's highlighted, it says that Lieutenant Fain and I, meaning Randy Carter there, Detective Carter, went to Trey's house, and Trey's mother answered the door. Then starting at the bottom, says, he stated that they talked and did stuff for a week in late July or the first week of August. And then the next week, she suddenly blocked him on all social media, and he has not spoken to her since. That's an important data point, isn't it? This is the father.
Right.
This is a father who said, when he was interviewed by the detectives, that he only messed around with her for 2 weeks, into July, beginning of August. That's what it says.
That's what it says. Yes.
That's an important fact to know, isn't it? When it
Assuming it's fact, yes.
Yeah. And it's important because when Skylar Richardson went to see Dr. Andrews on April 26, she was maybe, 38 weeks pregnant? 39 weeks or 40 weeks. On April 26. Does that make sense? Can you calculate it in your head from, I'm not being facetious, I'm talking about from, let's use the latest date, the first week in August, which ended August 5th, Saturday, August 5th. So calculating from that date, which would be the latest possible date of conception, to April 26th, do you agree that when Skylar went to see Dr. Andrew for the very first time and she learns that she's pregnant, she was 39 weeks pregnant? You agree with that?
Assuming he's the father.
Yeah, we are. I can allay your fears. He is the father. That has been established. So, 39 weeks on April 26. You have a fundal height. Dr. Andrews' fundal height is 32 weeks, correct? That's from the records.
Correct.
So, she's 39 weeks. That's a 7-week lag, isn't it?
According to the measurement, yes.
Wouldn't it have been helpful if you had that data point, Dr. Brady? That would have been very helpful in your opinion today, right?
Possibly, yes.
Just a couple more questions, famous last words of a lawyer. You familiar with the Reed method?
I'm sorry, the what method?
Reed. It's an interrogation technique. Are you familiar with that?
No.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Kraft, redirect.
Your Honor, if I may have one moment.
You may.
Dr. Brady, Mr. Ritger showed you a few lines from 2 articles, just lines. He didn't give you the whole article to read, correct?
Correct.
And the articles where he took those lines from, those are articles that already assume you've been diagnosed with intrauterine growth restriction, correct?
Yes.
So when he asks you if IUGR increases the risk of intrauterine demise, that's correct, right?
Correct.
I mean, that's a no-brainer.
Correct.
It doesn't mean that if you have intrauterine growth restriction, you have a stillborn child. It just means that if you have intrauterine growth restriction, then the risk of demise could increase.
Correct.
He also asked you if umbilical cord abnormalities result in IUGR, correct?
Correct.
Based on the information we have in this case, is there anything to diagnose an umbilical cord abnormality?
No.
You would agree that the defendant has given different statements in her interviews about whether the umbilical cord was attached or not.
Yes.
And I don't want to keep rehashing stuff, but if a baby drops out of the female body and there's nothing there to catch that baby, can the weight
Objection, Your
of the
Honor.
baby
That was,
sever the cord?
Yes.
Very early in your testimony, we talked about babies that are intrauterine growth restricted, premature, or just constitutionally small. What is a constitutionally small baby, doctor?
Judge, may we approach?
The objection is sustained.
thank you.
In this case, doctor, would you agree that the mother of baby Richardson, Brooke Richardson, is a very small statured female? Your Honor, can we ask the defendant to stand up for a moment?
Sure.
I would say thin-bodied. I'm not sure about height, but just to me, stature is height.
Okay.
You can sit down, Ms. Richardson. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense is arguing that we now have a 7-week lag, according to a screening fundal height measurement, correct?
Correct.
Fundal height measurement, is it anything more than a screening tool?
No.
Would you disagree with Dr. Andrew when he said that his 32-centimeter measurement was not definitive and could be off by 3 to 4 weeks?
Yes.
You would agree or disagree with him?
Agree.
Agree. So if he's measuring 32 weeks, if it's not definitive and can be off by 3 to 4, which is why I assume again,
Object, Your Honor, that was never the testimony.
Overruled.
Never.
Overruled.
if that fundal height measurement can be off by that much, I assume that's why it's nothing more than a screening tool, correct?
Correct.
And in this case, we have a baby that, as documented by Dr. Andrew, is already in cephalic presentation, correct?
Yes.
So on April 26th, she could have been very easily 35 to 36 weeks pregnant.
Correct.
If she had a baby 1.5 weeks later, she's now up to 37.5 weeks pregnant, perhaps. Maybe 38.5 weeks pregnant, perhaps. Because again, we're making all of these determinations off of a screening tool, correct?
Correct.
If we now have a 38.5 week baby, is that diagnostic of intrauterine growth restriction?
No.
Is that diagnostic of stillbirth?
No.
Do we have any evidence to support that we definitively have a lag in this baby's growth?
No.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Vickers, B. Cross?
Thank you, Your Honor. May I have 1 second? Doctor, I apologize if I misstated my question that Ms. Kraft pointed out to you when she stood back up here on redirect. I thought, and obviously I probably didn't do this, but the abnormality of an umbilical cord is a symptom of IUGR, isn't it?
No.
It can be, though, can it not?
I suppose it can, yes.
We just read in the ACOG thing about placental disruption and umbilical cord problems as being a problem of IUGR, right?
Correct.
So it could be a symptom of IUGR, couldn't it?
Could be a symptom and or a cause.
I didn't hear that.
And or a cause.
Or cause. I have no further questions. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor. You can step down. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to go ahead and end for the day. By nature, I'm not a very creative person, so it's difficult for me to keep finding ways to tell you the same instructions over and over again in new and different ways. I have to remind you again of essentially the same things that we have talked about. Now, I want to be serious about this one point, though, in that the longer that you are away from me, the more likely you are to forget the things that I am telling you. It is very important, because we're not going to see each other again until Monday. It is very important that you are not to do any research about this case. You are not to view any media reports. If you see a report come on television, flip it off. If you see something on your internet feed or see a newspaper, just go ahead and brush it aside. You might have people who you're going to come into contact with who are going to want to talk to you about this case, whether they know that you are a part of it or not. You have to tell them that you cannot talk about the case, do not discuss the matters with the people at home. Stay away from the Eagle Ridge address in Carlisle, and do not begin to form an opinion how this case should be decided. The farther we get into the evidence, the more that you might start to think that you have enough to start thinking about how this case should come out. You don't. So when we start back up with the evidence on Monday, we'll do the same thing that we did today. Let's plan on being here at 8:45 with the idea of being here, of starting at 9 o'clock.
Before you release the jury, Judge?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you can stretch out if you want. One last point, ladies and gentlemen, and I don't even know that this is a problem, but I like to talk about problems before they become problems, is the evidence that you are going to consider comes from this side of the courtroom. The witness stand, what's on the screen. What the lawyers say is not evidence. What people in the gallery say or how they respond to the evidence is also not evidence. So because we are a bit mushed up, you might be able to hear, I don't know if you can, overhear conversations about what goes on in the gallery, people talking about the case. I don't think that's probably the case, but if you do, you need to disregard whatever conversation you might hear on that side, focus on what happens on this side. All right, that's all. Mr. Mullins, you can take the jury out. We are on the record outside the presence of the jury. Mr. Rickers, do you want to make a record of the sidebar or not?
I think I do, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Just out of safety precautions. I don't know if you call it an objection, but I'd like the record to reflect that behind the prosecutor's table are, I think, 4 or 5 employees directly behind the prosecutor. I don't know. Recognize some of these ladies. Two for the prosecutor's office. I don't know if the other people are part of court personnel or what. But I noticed that they were talking while proceedings were going on. And my only concern, and I'm not saying that this is true, but my only concern is that they may be talking about the facts of this case or their opinions about this case, and they're no further than 5 feet away from the juror in the corner there. And I'm concerned that if they are talking about their opinions about this case or anything like that, that it could taint the jury. That's all I'm saying. And I don't know what you guys know. I don't know.
Didn't Ms. Kraft any response from the state?
No, Your Honor.
All right. With respect to the conduct of folks in the gallery, I don't know that this has been a problem. I haven't noticed that it's been a problem. If there is any conversation that goes on in the gallery, you keep your voices low. If I discover that this is happening, or I have any reason to believe that this is happening, you will be asked to leave and not permitted to return. One other thing with regard to the evidence while we're on the subject, if you're here watching, then the jury is not interested in your reactions to the testimony and what's going on. So if I find your reactions to be distracting to me, potentially distracting to the jury, the same thing will happen. You will be asked to leave and you will not return. All right, we'll see everybody 8:45 on Monday. Let's reconvene in about 10 minutes in Judge Teep's jury room. I think I will get that right eventually. And we'll just talk about some housekeeping matters before we leave for the weekend. Anything else from the state? Anything else from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
All right.
And that is going to do it for this installment, but I want to hit on a couple things. First of all, the defense attorney does bring up a great point. The fact that as far as courtroom behavior goes, as far as those in the gallery, if you're gonna talk about either your opinions or facts of the case, you have to be outside of earshot of any juror, or else you're going to end up tainting the jury, and usually a tainted jury could end up being grounds for mistrial. Now, as far as what I'm bringing tomorrow, I'm gonna take a risk on this. Tomorrow, I'm gonna do a duel, what we in baseball call a double header. The first BETHEA'S BYTE Reloaded that I'm going to do is going to cover all the events of this past week, which also includes the sentencing of Ethan Crumbley. I'll have all that. That's going to be the first edition of BETHEA'S BYTE Reloaded, my normal edition. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm going to set that for high noon in the east, 9 a.m. in the west. That's how I'm going to start that off. Later in the afternoon my time, early evening, you guys in the east, what I'll do then is bring the next installment of Throwback, Ohio versus Richardson, and the recalling of lead investigator Lieutenant John Fain. So to repeat, 12 o'clock Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific is my normal BETHEA'S BYTE Reloaded. Later in that afternoon, probably about I think I'm gonna go for 4:30, 5 o'clock my time to bring Lieutenant John Fain's testimony and likely more interrogation video. So now, be prepared for all that, because like I said, we got a doubleheader tomorrow. Thanks for joining me on this Friday. Be sure to hit me up on Facebook, X, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and email. I love you guys. Take it, spread it around, and I look forward to seeing you for tomorrow's doubleheader. Until then, Ernest Bethea, the Last Outlaw, signing off. You guys have a great night. Enjoy the weekend. I look forward to seeing you then. And until next time, you all know what to do. Bite this. Hey guys, this is the Last Outlaw saying thank you to all of you who watched this video and subscribe to BETHEA'S BYTE Reloaded, your drama-free true crime destination. I couldn't dream of doing this without you, so thank you. Did you enjoy this presentation? Are you looking to get more information on everything presented here? Are you looking to give more feedback on this presentation? Here's what you can do. Like this video. The more eyes on this video, the more this information is spread to others, which brings us a step closer to justice served. Share this video to your social media. Just like dropping a like, the more eyes on this video, the closer we get to justice served. Drop me a comment, whether it's on the topic or the presentation. I am open to all comments, whether it's a theory, a speculation, or a suggestion. I will respond to all. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button to show your support of this little true crime engine powered by you. Set the notification bell to all for future videos. Be sure to follow BETHEA'S BYTE Reloaded all over social media. At BETHEA'S BYTE Reloaded True Crime on Facebook. At EKB316 on X, formerly known as Twitter. At BETHEA'S BYTE Reloaded on YouTube. At EKB316 on Instagram. At King of Hearts 316 2021 on TikTok. You can drop me an email as well. The address is kingofhearts316_09@outlook.com. This is your home for news without the drama, where your opinions matter, for lively debates, where your voice is heard, and above all else, justice served. This is BETHEA'S BYTE, and it's reloaded.